Hey everyone, welcome back to Q's Book Reviews. I'm Quinn, thanks for joining me. A few weeks back I did my first book tag, which was a classics tag, and I asked if there's any others you'd like to see me do. Someone suggested the mid-year freakout tag, and I'm nothing if not a people pleaser, so here it is. Before we begin, if you want, grab yourself a nice drink and get cozy. I've got a nice cold cider here. Let's begin. I guess I'll just start off by going over my reading year so far, and honestly it's been one of my best yet, and I say that for two reasons. And the first is that I've already read quite a bit for my standards, just around 20 books, which is about the amount I read in 1 year, so yeah, I'm reading quite a bit. But then I've also read some of the best books I've ever read, so we've got both quantity and quality. Let me know how your reading year is going so far in the comments, I'd love to hear. Alright, on to the questions themselves. The first is the best book you've read so far. And this is actually a really tough question because, as I've said, I've read some of my favorite books ever so far this year. But I think the one that's going to have to eke out first place is Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. I still don't have my copy on me, sadly, so you'll have to deal with just some graphics or whatever. I actually started this monster of a book back in November of 2022, but only finished in May of this year, so it took me about 6 months. But if you've read this book or even heard of it, you'll likely know why that is. It is a notoriously difficult, postmodern, encyclopedic novel, which the more I think about it, really reminds me of like a Moby Dick for the post-war years. It follows the meanderings of Tyrone Slothrop throughout Europe, just after the end of World War II, but it really does it in the most roundabout way possible, introducing hundreds of characters and extremely complex themes and symbolism. I think the best way to give a feel for this book is with a 6 or 7 page long episode Pynchon includes, nearly for the only purpose of setting up an incredibly convoluted sentence-long pun. While people tend to focus on the difficulty of this book, that often neglects the fact that reading Gravity's Rainbow can be such a joy, as it's oftentimes really funny. Now, to be fair, it is also extremely dark at times, reaching into the most depraved parts of human existence, but of course that's what makes the book so good. The second question is the best sequel you've read so far, and here already we get into a question that I can't really answer because I'm just not much of a series reader, so I haven't read a sequel yet so far. I think the only things that could be seen to count are maybe Gravity's Rainbow and As I Lay Dying. I know there are multiple characters in Gravity's Rainbow who are taken from Pynchon's earlier novel, V, as well as his short story collection, Slow Learner. But even so, it's not really a sequel. It's more like it just exists in the same universe as those other books. And this is also the case with As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, who sort of sets all his stories in the same fictional county in Mississippi. So there are a few references to other characters from his other books in here. So while both of these books are fantastic, neither really quite count as a sequel, so sorry for the cop-out on this one. And then again, another question that I can't fully answer, which is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to. I have to admit, I just really don't read many contemporary authors, which is something I'd really like to change. There's so many books going back like 200 years that I really want to get to at some point, but I can't name a single book that came out this year that I put on my TBR. Like the most recently released book that I'm interested in is the double release from Cormac McCarthy of The Passenger and Stella Maris, which came out last year. If there are any current authors that you really love that you think I should check out, please let me know because I'm on the hunt. And it's basically the same for the fourth question as well, which is my most anticipated release of the second half of the year. So I guess I'll have to defer to you all on this one. What's your answer to this question? What are you excited for that's coming out soon? Sorry for not really being able to answer these last few. That's why I was hesitant to do this tag, actually. I do have an answer for number 5, though, which is the biggest disappointment. If you guys have been watching my channel for a little bit, you might be able to see this one coming, but it's The Secret History. I was actually really excited to read this because it's become so loved by so many people, but it really just didn't work for me. I had a lot of problems with the writing, and I think it kind of squandered a lot of the potential that it had. I haven't completely given up on dark academia, as it's a genre that I think I could really come to love, but I don't think I'll be reading any of Donna Tartt's other books. For the biggest surprise so far this year, I'll go with As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. While I did expect to like this book, I was surprised by just how much I liked it. It's one of the most emotionally affecting books that I've ever read, and the prose is super creative. It's made me really want to delve into Faulkner's other works as well, which I anticipate to be really just as good. The next question is my favorite new author, and again, this is a really tough question because I've read so many great authors who are new to me, such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy, or even Leo Sisson. Given that I was so impressed by As I Lay Dying, I think it's only fair to choose William Faulkner as one of my new favorites. But really all of these authors are people who I need to read a whole lot more from. So the next two questions are newest fictional crush and newest favorite character. And I have two choices, but I can't really decide which one to choose for which question. The first character I'm thinking of is Roger Mexico from Gravity's Rainbow, and he's probably my favorite character in the book. Roger Mexico is a statistician employed by the British government to track the distribution of the V2 rocket hits on London, and he's set up as sort of an ideological opposite to the more sinister, determinist Dr. Pointsman. During the course of the war, Roger gets in an affair with Jessica Swan Lake, and while their love is doomed to fail as the war ends, in the broader context of Gravity's Rainbow, it's one of the more wholesome and genuine relationships for sure. I definitely wish he had more appearances in the book. Even if it's not totally fair to call him my new fictional crush, I did really love his character. The other person I'd choose for either of these two is Bartleby from Bartleby the Scrivener by Herman Melville. Bartleby is a clerk who's hired by a lawyer who has the audacity to just straight up not do his job and say so right to his boss's face, saying he would prefer not to whenever he's asked to do something he doesn't want. On top of this, he ends up living in the office and basically kicking the lawyer out. So yeah, just a wicked interesting character. I think he maybe falls more in line with the new favorite character. For a book that made me cry, I'll say I'm not a super emotional person, but the book that made me come the closest, I think it even did actually make me cry a little bit, was again As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. The family in this goes through so much hardship, but really the thing that makes it worse is that they're the ones who are really putting themselves through this hardship. One scene in particular had me feeling so bad for Cash, and that's the scene that made me cry, while also making me feel sick to my stomach, really. Next is the opposite, a book that made me happy. I'd say most of the books I read are pretty dark, though I have read a few so far which have been on the lighter side. That said, I am still going to choose a book which is kind of dark, that being We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. While billed as a psychological mystery following a family and the circumstances that led to their outcast and alienation, I actually found a lot of aspects of this book to be quite cozy, and the world that I was able to conjure up was kind of relaxing at some points. Perhaps this is due in part to the fact that the story is told from the perspective of either a child or a young adult who's still quite naive, and so the whole book has an air of aloofness and whimsy, which I really found quite charming. Although it definitely did make me happy at times, other parts can be quite grim and unsettling, but as I said before, I think this is really the hallmark of a great story. The penultimate question is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year, and I think I'm going to have to go with this copy of 2066 by Roberto Bolaño, which I think is just super interesting and unique. I guess the art is by Gustave Moreau, who I think I've seen a few other paintings from, but in either case, I just find this cover super striking. I'm already wicked excited to read this book, and it having a beautiful cover certainly doesn't hurt at all. And the final question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I'm going to go with, can I say every book ever written? Probably not realistic. More feasibly, I'd really love to get to Ulysses this year, but it's more likely that I'll start it at some point this year and end up finishing it next year. I guess I'd also really love to read another of Pynchon's books, especially considering how many there are that I still need to read. I really want to read Inherent Vice next, which is on the shorter and easier side, so I shouldn't have any problem finishing it this year, but his books are so hard to find in stores. I mostly like buying secondhand, which of course makes it more difficult, but a few months ago I actually came across all of Pynchon's books in a used bookstore, with the exception, obviously, of Inherent Vice. So yeah, I really would like to read that by the end of the year, but it's something that might be a bit out of my control, seeing as I still don't have a copy. There we have it. Those are my answers to the mid-year book tag. I hope you found that interesting, and I'd like to thank you very much for watching. If you feel like it, please do leave your answers to the questions in the comments below. I'd love to give them a read. I've read some really great books just in the last month that I'm very excited to talk about in my July wrap-up. So if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. I'd really appreciate it. All right, that's all from me. See ya.